Hi, this is Dr. Schallenberger, and I'm just finishing up here on the fifth part of this series that I've entitled Disease is Optional, You Can Opt Out. The other four parts to this series are all on YouTube by now, and you can take a look at those, and hopefully you've already done that. In the first part, we learned about how critical mitochondrial function is to the whole process of aging, and how if you maintain youthful mitochondrial function as you get older, your body will behave like a much younger body. You won't be subject to the weakness and the frailty and all the vulnerability to disease that ordinarily people will succumb to as they get older and older. In other words, with youthful mitochondrial function, you're going to live out into your 80s and 90s and maybe beyond, fully functional, everything working, and no disease, no medications, and so that's the goal. In the first part of the series, we learned about that. In the second part of the series, we learned how you can measure your mitochondrial function using something I call bioenergy testing. I explained how all that works. And because, if you don't measure it, you don't know if you have a problem or not. And so make sure that you take a look at that part 2. In part 3, we looked at specifically at thyroid function, how critical thyroid function is to mitochondrial function, and yet how the only reliable way to do it is not the blood tests. The only reliable way to know if your thyroid is functioning well is by looking at your resting metabolic rate. And then in the last part 4, we looked at how critical diet can be. For some of us, in order to have optimal mitochondrial function, we have to have a diet fairly high in carbohydrate. But for others of us, in order to have optimal mitochondrial function, you got to have a diet fairly low in carbohydrates. So we talked about how you can use the testing procedure to determine where you are on that end of the scale. So this time, in part 5, I'm going to talk to you about the single most critical thing that we can do to maintain youthful mitochondrial function as we get older, and that is exercise properly done. Now, I don't mean the other things that I talked about are not that important. They are also critical. But what I am telling you is, if you don't get this exercise part down and get it down correctly, nothing else is going to work. This is the key element and the key issue that we want to focus on. Aerobic exercise, properly done, is the single most important way to maintain youthful mitochondrial function. Got to do the other things too, but this is absolutely critical. So I talked about aerobic exercise properly done. So what that means is there's a certain way to do this form of exercise to improve your mitochondrial function. Not all exercise does that. So for example, people say, oh yeah, I exercise, meaning they'll go out and they'll play tennis, or they work in the garden, or they do some other sort of activity. That's wonderful. It's great. It's healthy. I encourage you to do it. It can be a lot of fun, but that's not what I'm talking about. When I talk about aerobic exercise properly done, I'm actually talking about torturing your cells. So think of it this way. In your cells are capable of making this much energy. This is your maximum energy production. We talked about that in part 1, okay? Now let's say it's not so good. Let's say here's your maximal energy production, and here's where youthful energy production is. So you don't really measure up to that. So how are you going to get from here to here? Well, you're not going to do it if you don't force your cells to adapt. Let me give you an example. Let's say I want to get this bicep of mine to be stronger. Okay, I want to get a bigger muscle. I want it to be a stronger bicep. That is not going to work if I pick up something that I can just exercise over and over again. That's just not going to do anything. I can already do that. My muscle's already capable of doing that. So that's not going to make it any stronger. The only way I'm going to make this muscle stronger is to force it to do things it's not capable of doing. So I got to pick up a really heavy weight and keep pushing it until I can no longer move it. What's going to happen at that point is my muscle is going to say, you know what? He's making us do more than we're capable of doing. We need to adapt to that. We need to get bigger. We need to get stronger. And that's the same concept between exercise properly done and exercising your mitochondria. So instead of doing just this, they can produce that much energy. So here's what you do. You got to torture your cells. You've got to demand more energy from them than they're capable of giving you. Now, as it would turn out, you don't have to do that very long. You could do it for 20 or 30 seconds. Believe it or not, it doesn't take much. But for 20 or 30 seconds, you're going to tell your cells, I want you to produce more energy for me than you are actually capable of producing. And as I continue to do that over time, what those cells are going to do is they're going to start adapting. They're going to start getting better and better and better because I'm pushing them. I'm not doing what they're capable of. I'm doing what they're incapable of. And I'm pushing them. And that's called the training effect. Okay, so you don't get that by gardening or bowling or anything like that. You've got to do it in a very specific way. And that's what we're going to talk about in this part of the series. Next thing I want to mention is that you do want to make your exercise a routine. Just remember that. You think of brushing your teeth. You don't just like brush your teeth when you sort of feel like it. You have a little routine you do it. Maybe morning and night, whatever your routine is. But you just do it. This is the same with exercise. You have to get this dialed in your head. You just don't do this when you want to. And I'm going to give you a very good protocol that's quick, it's simple, it's easy. Anybody can do it. I do it. So many of my patients do it. And so we're going to talk to you specifically about how you go about that. The idea is to exercise smart. And that means more efficiency. That means training those mitochondria to produce energy at a higher level. And doing that smart. So it takes less time. It's easier on you and it takes less time if you do it smart. If you don't do it smart, either one, not going to accomplish it, or two, you're going to work way harder than you need to work. So we'll talk specifically about that. Now, this form of exercise you might have heard about, it's called high intensity interval training. What this means is you're going to go through a 2 or 3 minute period. Now, by the way, you need an exercise equipment for this. You can't really do this outside. The only equipment that's not suitable for this form of exercise is treadmills. Reason being, it's hard to do it on a treadmill, and it's very easy to hurt yourself on a treadmill. So I do not recommend treadmills for this. But any other form of exercise equipment is great. I happen to like rowing machines. Stationary bicycles are great. Elliptical trainers are great. Ski machines are great. There's all stair steppers. There's all kinds of things you can do. Just stay away from the treadmill for this particular exercise. But what you're going to do is you're going to get on this machine, whichever one you choose, and you're going to exercise for about 2 or 3 minutes at kind of a moderate pace. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about how you know that pace in a sec, at a fairly moderate pace. And then after 2 or 3 minutes of that, you're going to go full out as hard as you possibly can for 20 to 30 seconds. The idea is that you're going so hard that by the time you hit that 20, 30-second mark, you're spent. You've got nothing left. You couldn't do it anymore if they offered you $1 million. You're tagged out, okay? Your heart rate is pounding. You're out of breath, and you're saying to yourself, I'm spent. I can't do this anymore. Super duper effort. Now, what that means is, during that 20 seconds, you just told your cells, I want you to give me this much energy. And your cells said, well, we can only give you this much. And that's true. That's why you had to stop. But as you continue to do this in a routine, day after day, what's going to happen is your cells are going to start adapting. They're going to start processing oxygen even better and better. The mitochondria are going to get better and better until finally they get up to that point where you want them to get, where they're producing energy in a very youthful way. That is the nature of high-intensity interval training. You won't get it by doing any other form of exercise. So it's critical, and we're going to go into exactly how you go about it. So here's the first concept I want you to get. Do it in the morning. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is if you wait till later on in the day, for most people, and I know people are different, so maybe you're different, but for most people, you wait until the later end of the day, guess what? you're not going to do it. You're going to be too tired. You're going to find some excuse, and you're going to say, "Yeah, let's just skip it." You're just not going to do it. So what I do is when I get up in the morning, bang, down in my bathrobe, on the machine, getting it done, and then I start my day. That way, I accomplish it. I don't have to wonder what I'm going to do when I get home and I'm all tired from working. The other thing that's important is that when you do it in the morning, you're doing it on an empty stomach after an overnight fast. This exercise routine works much better on an unfed person. So after a fast is literally the best time and most efficient time to do high-intensity interval training. Okay, so here's how you do it. When you do the bioenergy test, which I talked about in part 2 of the series, how to measure your mitochondrial function, what we do is we exercise people starting at one level, and we work them harder and harder and harder and harder until they get up to the point where their energy level is maxed out. Okay? Now, as we're working them harder and harder, the first part of the exercise, they're burning fat predominantly for their energy production. And as they exercise harder and harder, they're burning more and more and more and more fat until they get to a certain point. And that would be the point of maximum fat burning. After that point, the body starts switching over into sugar burning. And as they exercise harder and harder past that point, eventually they get to a point where they're not burning any fat at all, and they're only burning sugar. Those are the two critical points that we measure with bioenergy testing. So what I can tell you is 1, where your maximum fat burning point is, and 2, where your maximum sugar burning point is. And we use those 2 points in the following way. The first one I call a fat burning heart rate. So we look at your heart rate when you hit that point, and we might say, okay, when you hit a heart rate of 120, that's your maximum fat burning. Why that's important is at that point that your body literally can exercise for hours on end without failing. And so that's your recovery point. So as we go through the exercise and go through that high intensity part I told you about, after you finish the high intensity part, you're going to want to rest very quietly until your heart rate comes back down to that fat burning heart rate. Might take 3, 4, 5 minutes, but that recovery period is very critical. You just tortured your cells, and before you torture them again, you've got to let them recover. Recovery is every bit as important as the torture part. Every bit as important. So what you're going to do is, after that little torture part, you're going to just sit quietly in a chair and rest. Might take 3, 4, 5 minutes, depending on what kind of condition you're in, until your heart rate, which at that point after the sprint is going to be quite high. Wait till it comes all the way down to your fat burning heart rate, which can be determined from the bioenergy test. Now, by the way, that's important to know this and get the bioenergy test to find out where these heart rates are, because they're totally different for everybody. I know they have formulas out there, but you know what? I published a study back in 2004. We looked at 20 people, and we found out that the formulas were only correct in 2. The formulas either overdid it for them or underdid it for the other 18. So the formulas are pretty close to useless. You got to actually measure where you stand, because everybody is so different. So that's what you do. You're going to get those 2 points when you do the bioenergy test: your fat burning heart rate and what we call your anaerobic threshold heart rate, which is where you burn maximal amounts of sugar. So here's what you do. You get on your bicycle or your rowing machine or whatever you're going to do for 2 or 3 minutes, and you exercise at that ATR, the anaerobic threshold heart rate. This will be a heart rate it'll push you a little bit, but you'll easily be able to do it for 2 or 3 minutes. That's not going to be a problem. At the end of that 2 or 3 minutes now you go into your sprint part. You go as hard as you possibly can go for the next 20 to 30 seconds. The idea being that by the time you hit that 20 or 30 second mark, you're tapped out, you got nothing left, your heart's pounding, you're way out of breath, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I've done this correctly, I've got to stop now. At that point, you literally get off the machine, Or maybe if you're on a bicycle, you just sit there on the bicycle seat if you want. But most of the time, people just get off the machine and just sit in a chair very quietly and let their body recover, let their cells recover. And you'll know when you're recovered, because your heart rate, which after that sprint is going to be quite high, is going to gradually drop over the next 3, 4, 5 minutes until it gets down to your fat-burning heart rate. Remember, all that's determined by your bioenergy test scores. And once it's down your fat-burning heart rate, you can say to yourself, okay, my cells, my body has completely recovered from what I just did, and now let's go do it again. You only have to do 2 of these. They published a study not too long ago. In the old days, we used to think you had to do 6 of these. And I want to tell you, that was rough. Doing 6 of these in a row is very rough. Recently, they published a study showing that you can improve your mitochondrial function very efficiently, assuming you're not some kind of, competitive athlete. That's different for athletes. But for just normal people like you and I who want to be healthy as we get older, for us, you only need to do 2 intervals. 2 20 to 30 second intervals done 3 times a week is it. So you do the first one, 2-3 minutes at your ATR, your 20-30 second sprint, your recovery period down to your FBR, and then you repeat that once more. Do a total of 2 of those. Folks, it takes you like 10, maybe 12, maximum 15 minutes to do this. That's all you have to do. And then you do that 3 times a week. Just get in the habit. I like to do it Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, but whatever your thing is, do it 3 days a week and have a day in between so body can fully recover from what you've done. That's all you got to do. Now, in addition to that, go out, take a walk. Go ride your bike. Go play tennis. Do all those things that are fantastic for you. But make sure that you get this in. It's very critically important that you do this. The other thing I want to check with you is that you remember that the whole reason we're doing this is to optimize mitochondrial function. So after you've done it for 3, 4, 5 months, recheck your mitochondrial function. You want to make sure that everything that you've been doing is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is improving your mitochondrial function. So it's kind of the same as, let's say you had high blood pressure, and you measure your blood pressure, you say, okay, it's high, and now you're going to do something. Maybe you're going to take a medication, maybe you're going to change the way you eat, or whatever you're going to do. You got to recheck your blood pressure to see if it's working. So that's the critical part. So make sure that you recheck your bioenergy testing just to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And you can find doctors that are currently doing this with their patients. Even right now, there's a number of them throughout the world. Most of them are located here in the U.S. And you can find these doctors at www.bioenergytesting.com. Bioenergytesting.com. And that'll give you a list of all the doctors. Unfortunately, this is such a new radical thing. This whole concept of living long and never getting sick is such a new radically different thing. And mitochondrial function is something people have talked about for decades, but have never gotten down to the clinical level where doctors actually measure it and utilize it. Unfortunately, there's not so many doctors doing it. I look forward to the day when there are doctors in every large city in the country and maybe around the world doing these kinds of things with their patients, making it available to their patients. But right now, the odds are pretty good, unless you got lucky, that you're going to have to do some traveling to do this. On the other hand, you only have to do it once, maybe twice a year. It's nothing you have to do a lot, and it's worthwhile traveling. I believe that it's so important to do this that you could definitely get in your car, drive a little bit, maybe even take an airplane, find somebody that's doing this particular procedure, get your mitochondrial function dialed in, because it's so critical to maintaining a youthful activity level and a youthful state of health even as you get very older. So just to recap, Optimizing your mitochondrial function is a sure way to prevent chronic disease. That's the only way to do it. If you have poor mitochondrial function as you get older, I promise you, you're going to have a problem. Conversely, if you maintain youthful mitochondrial function, I promise you, you're going to be in pretty good shape no matter what your age is, and you're not going to be stuck in hospitals and seeing multiple specialists and all that kind of thing. So measure your bioenergy testing, find one of those doctors and measure it. Determine if your thyroid is adequate. If it's not, doctors know how to deal with that. Determine your diet. That's very critical. Are you the type of person that should be eating a diet relatively high in carbohydrates? Or are you the type of person whose mitochondria don't work well unless you eat a diet relatively low in carbohydrates? That's critical. We're all different. I get into that part in part 4 of this series, so make sure you check that out. And of course, get the exercise routine going. I just explained it to you. It's really easy. I'm also going to give you a little plug for my book, Bursting with Energy. It's been out on the market now for 20 years. I just recently rewrote it with some more data in there to cover, but it covers the whole testing process, gets into a little bit more data. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Bursting with Energy. So I encourage you to take a look at that. It gives you a lot of other tips in terms of supplements and things like that, because supplements can get involved in this as well. And once you get your bioenergy testing optimized and your mitochondrial optimized, just check it every 1 or 2 years just to make sure it stays that way. Because sure enough, as the birthdays start to pile on, there's going to be this tendency for your mitochondrial function to kind of slip down. And as that happens, you want to get ahead of it and be able to make the proper changes, for example, maybe to your exercise program, maybe to your hormonal or supplement program. You want to be able to make the changes necessary to bring you back online so that no matter how old you get, your mitochondrial function is a nice, youthful, stable level. So that's it, folks. That's part 5. That's exercise. So hope this series has been good for you. I really hope and look forward to you finding a doctor relatively close to you and getting your mitochondrial function measured. If it's great already, fantastic. Then you've already got yourself dialed in nicely. Just stay on your program and check it periodically, maybe every 1 or 2 years. If it's not so good, you stand forewarned. If it's not so good, your future's looking not so good. So if it's not so good, what you're going to want to do is use some of the data that's on that test, as per what we talked about in this series, to bring it up to youthful levels, and that's going to make your life so much better as you go through this thing that we call aging and living up into your, quote, golden years. So that's it for me. Good luck and do a good job. See you later.